Okay, so welcome Peter Mt Shasta to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here, Peter. It's an honor to have you. Um, Peter is an author, a spiritual teacher, and just generally a servant, loving servant of humanity, I would say. I guess many different things, but I've read 4 of your books now, and I've been deeply inspired and been to Mount Shasta many times. So it's great to have you, Peter, and finally meet you.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate you having me on your show. And I'm sorry I missed you when you're on the mountain.
Yep, that was
And
too bad.
yeah, I never thought I'd be doing this. I'm basically a very shy person. We had to recite poetry when I was in school, in high school. And I'd learn a poem inside out, and I'd get up in front of the group, and my mind would go blank. So I'm not one of these people that loves to get up in front of a group and be famous. It just kind of, just sort of happened that I'm in front of people, you know, but I'm more of a yogi, really. But I really did not believe in God as a child. Both my parents were atheists. My father was a scientist, and he said, don't believe anything that you haven't proven for yourself. So I would say, God, are you there? And I wouldn't get an answer, and I'd go to church and the minister would say, let's pray for this member of our congregation who's in the hospital, and the person would die. And I thought, the minister is a professional and he can't make prayer work. How am I going to make it work? So I got to be about the age of 21 after I graduated from college, and I moved to New York City. And I was more actually at the end of the beatnik era than at the beginning of the hippie thing. I knew Allen Ginsberg, and I had friends that were friends with Jack Kerouac, all that stuff. So it was the kind of whole beat scene. But I moved to New York City and I started writing poetry. And someone said, you should do hatha yoga for your health. So I said, okay. So the moment I started doing hatha yoga in a class, I felt energy going through my body. And I went, wow, there's something beyond the physical plane. There's energy. So after the first yoga class, I went to a metaphysical bookstore and I asked for their best book on yoga. They gave me something on Ramakrishna, this great saint in India. And as soon as I started reading it, things started to click for me. And then I started having these kind of transcendental experiences, what you'd call samadhi, like going into bliss, the human self disappearing. I mean, no awareness of self, just awareness of the cosmic Om and bliss and light, And so then I heard Ram Dass interviewed on the radio. And he was this, Harvard professor, Richard Alpert, and he was fired for experimenting with LSD. And he went to India to see if you could achieve those superconscious states naturally. And so he was talking about his experience meeting his guru, Neem Karoli Baba. And I got this thing, why not go to India, see what I can find? And I didn't want to be, I was raised in a well-to-do suburb of New York, and I was supposed to be one of those people that was a doctor, a lawyer, a broker on Wall Street or something. And, I discovered at a very early age, kind of like Buddha, that life did not, chasing sensory things did not lead to happiness. And so I was kind of at a point, I really didn't know what to do with my life, and going to India sounded like a good idea. Well, it turned out I didn't really relate that much to Neem Karoli Baba, but I traveled all over India, meeting many amazing saints like Anandamayi Mai, and I met yogis in the Himalayas that could perform miracles. They could precipitate objects out of the air. They didn't eat. They would cook for me like 1 or 2 times bowls of rice a week, but they didn't eat. They barely slept, and they didn't age. I saw a picture of this one guy I knew, But 40 years later, he hadn't changed at all. And so I became aware of these other beings. And when I came back to the West, these beings could leave their body when they wanted. Like when they said, I think I've done everything I want to do on the earth, they could leave. And the yogi one of the yogis I stayed with was getting ready to do that. So when I came back to the West, I had nothing that I really wanted to do. I was kind of camped out at People's Park in Berkeley. And the people in India had told me you should go to Mount Shasta. I said, I want to find a place back in the States that's kind of like India. And they said, go to Mount Shasta, like it's like the Himalayas. So I came here. Well, what happened was one morning I woke up. For a while I was crashed on a friend's floor in Berkeley, Jayutal. And one morning there was this ball of light over me, and I heard this voice say, go to Muir Woods, I'll meet you there. So I went there and I prayed to leave my body. I was doing this Vipassana meditation with my eyes open. And suddenly there was a guy standing in front of me. He didn't walk up, he was just standing there. This was not on drugs. I've done very few drugs in my life, or, what they call plant medicine now. So it's just there was nobody there, and suddenly there's someone there. And this guy wearing jeans, he said, Peter, your prayer has been heard. And I said, well, I was at 27 now. Finally, a prayer has been answered. And he said, I am the part of the Godhead that's been sent to answer your prayer. And he said, you can leave the earth if you want. In fact, I will help you. But I want to show you something before you give me your answer. And I said, fine. And he touched my third eye. He took me out of the physical body. I looked back. There was my body sitting in the tree meditating. I was in another body that looked just like it, my etheric body. And he took me off the earth to this realm where beings existed as balls of light. I don't know if you can see the picture behind me. Can you see that? I don't know if that.
Yeah, I can see it. It comes up. Yeah.
See it. Okay. Well, just these beautiful balls of light emanating these rainbow colors. And the feeling of bliss was overwhelming. And I said, this is it. This is where I want to be. Thanks for bringing me here. And then I heard crying coming from someplace. And I looked down and I saw the earth, this little blue ball beneath my feet. And I said, what is that horrible sound? He said, that is the suffering of humanity. And my heart just went out. I said, I can't leave. I want to go back and help. Now, he didn't say you're taking the Bodhisattva vow, which is in Buddhism, if you renounce your own liberation for the sake of others. But he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just said, great, I want you to help me with my work. But you need training first. I want to send you to Mount Shasta. Your teacher is waiting for you there. The next thing I know, I was back in my body in Muir Woods. And he said, now I'll show you who I am. And he kind of, as a physical being, faded out, and he appeared as Saint Germain, this being who I'd seen in Unveiled Mysteries, in the front of Unveiled Mysteries. And then he just disappeared, and I came to Mount Shasta. And make a long story short, I met Pearl, and she said, I've been waiting for you. And she said, what brought you here? And I said, I had this amazing experience. And she said, that was Saint Germain. He came to me this morning and said he was sending you to see me. So that was in 1973. And I became a very close student of hers for many years. And she taught me, the first meeting, she said, do you want to meditate? And I was going to, like in India, I was going to sit in lotus position and close my eyes and all that. And she said, you don't need to sit on the floor to meditate. In fact, you don't even need to close your eyes. And I went, wow, that's a shock. And she just feel the sun in your heart. you kind of let your eyes go out of focus, but just feel the sun there and just feel, I am the living light. And I could feel the light coming from her. And it's like she sort of became enfolded in light. And I said, she said, you look surprised. And I said, all my life I've heard that expression, have you seen the light? And I thought it was just an expression, you know, a metaphor. And I said, but I see the light now. I saw the light come into the room. When I said, I am the living light, I saw it come into the room. And that was a real turning point in my life. And I used to sit with her like that in the morning, and we do this, I call it looking meditation, where we both tune into that light and send it to each other. And she said, that light is going out to the whole world. So anyway, that's kind of what brought me to Mount Shasta.
So can I just quickly ask about, because India, you talk a lot about that in the books, and what was kind of you searched and searched and searched for all these gurus like Neem Karoli Baba, Ram Dass's guru, and then others, and you had sort of a frustrating experience or an experience of like, I'm not getting enough, I'm being rejected, or this isn't quite for me. But you also had the enlightenment experiences on the other hand, where you had like sort of memories of past lives, and there was a certain love you had for the culture and the land of India. And I think it was a few years that you spent there total, but what was the biggest takeaway you took? And then contrasting that to then finding Pearl, who ended up being like the guru, the teacher that was really meant for you.
Well, the amazing thing is, I mean, the I am teachings are really a part of the Indian culture, but they don't call it that. They say, instead of saying I am, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman, you know, and there are, it's amazing to be in a culture where people are so serious. Now it's, you know, may have changed quite a bit over the years. This was 50 years ago, but people who were just sitting around under a tree or even on the sidewalk, totally immersed, seeking God, you know, not just going to church on Sunday, but people who lived it every day. And that, you know, in the West, it was, you know, God is somebody up there or out there, sort of, and you have to go to church to contact them. Or if you're close to God, still, God is somebody external. In India, the concept of God realization, that you could realize that you are a God being yourself, you know, and how to become that. And I met people that were God realized, and they could, you know, they knew what food I wanted. They could precipitate it out of the air or precipitate objects in my hand. And
Yeah.
the people that knew what I was thinking, and they were not into money. They didn't ask for money. Most of them, I mean, a lot of them were silent. They didn't even talk. These were not people wanting to proclaim themselves, you know, Satgurus or Mahagurus or, you know, enlightened beings. They just basically wanted to be left alone, and they were in a state of bliss and omniscience. And they were not trying to promote themselves like in the West. Somebody gets a little bit of awareness and then they give themselves a title and want to charge a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah. So what was, because that seems like a thread like throughout the India years and your earlier life, you sort of were reaching enlightenment, but you wanted to leave. You somewhat wanted to give up, or there was a piece of this place and this experience that you really didn't like, and you just wanted to kind of float off into the bliss.
Well, I didn't want to be in the material,
Yeah.
in the West, the material world, where it's all about becoming famous or making money or, you know, wild parties or things like, I saw at a very early age that didn't lead to happiness. And that's kind of one of Buddha's, you know, initial messages, is that the pursuit of things like trying to attain human desires, just that attachment doesn't lead to happiness. It's not fulfilling. And I realized that long before that, probably the age of 14, I realized that leading that kind of a life wasn't going to make me happy. I was looking for something else, you know.
You said once in an interview, you said we're in a laboratory for the Christ self.
Hmm.
So what did you mean by that?
Well, how to find the Christ self, and then how to live in the world with that. You see, there are a lot of spiritual teachers in the West that give parts of the teachings from India, like Advaita, you know, the oneness, that's very high teaching. But if you're living in the world, you're living in duality. And it's just ridiculous to say that, you know, the left side of the street and the right side of the street are the same. That's if you want to be a taxi driver, you're not going to live very long if you don't accept they're two sides of the street, you know? So,
Yes.
but you can still be in the Christ self where you're a compassionate, you have God realization, you're a compassionate being, you know?
Was
But
there a
you can't drive a taxi in samadhi. If you're in
yeah.
full samadhi, you're not aware even of the material world. You're just merged with the Paramatma and with Brahman, just universal consciousness where there's no self, and you cannot drive a car or, you know, slice a carrot or walk down the street in that consciousness, you know.
Yeah,
So
so similar to that, because I wanted to talk about one of the parts in the book when you talk about, I think you were celibate for a very long period of time. You had taken a vow.
yeah,
And then I think was it your mid 30s or late 30s where you had
probably.
Saint Germain guided you to get married to Donna.
Yeah.
And then that marriage lasted 2 years. How was that transition? Like, how did you transition into like having this God presence, working with the I am, and then having to come into a relationship?
Well, it's very funny because I had met Donna at Pearls and we had an immediate connection, but she was living in Berkeley. I was in Mount Shasta, and this was before email or cell phones. So we'd write letters to each other, you know, about every week. I'd send her a letter, she'd send me a letter, and we disagreed about everything. You know, so I sort of given up on it, forget that. And then on January 1st, Saint Germain came to, they always have like a meeting at the Tetons, and the masters show their disciples the plan for the coming year, although not everybody remembers it. But this time, Saint Germain came to me so I could see him there in the room in his etheric body. And he said, "This year, I want you to be married." And I said, "I can't be married. I'm a member of the Order of Melchizedek. I'm celibate." And he said, "I know." And then I said, "If you want me to be married, who is it you want me to marry?" And he motioned his hand like that. And I saw Donna walk in the room in her etheric body. And I said, "You got to be kidding. We disagree about everything." And he said, "I know it'll be good for you."
Yeah.
So that's the kind of, you think when the masters pick out a mate for you, this is going to be somebody that pleases you, that you're mutually in harmony, you know?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's to work out karma, it's to learn certain lessons, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's such a struggle for people in modern day and even my age, like just dating, all of it, the who do you pick, who's your person, people are like, is there a one? But that brings me to the next point, which is Elizabeth, who you mentioned in the book, who you met much earlier in
Twin
life,
ray. Yeah.
who you strongly believed or knew was your twin flame or the one. Um, you had this magnetic connection instantly, you had an instant remembrance, and you had a couple of run-ins with her where you thought maybe you might get back together. Um, and I remember you describing the heartbreak and how painful it like destroyed you in the books. And the master is saying, you have to let it go and don't let the despair of the person pull you back, because it's not meant for you. But I basically want to know, and I think other people would want to know, is how do you get through that heartbreak of knowing someone's your twin flame, but you're not meant to be together in this lifetime?
Well, what finally helped me was, well, first of all, out of the blue, it was over Christmas, I was staying with my mother, and she called up and wanted to come visit, which was very strange. And I thought, well, we're going to be joined together. The masters are going to finally allow us to be together. But while she was there, I had a dream. The masters gave me a dream, and I saw what our life would be like if we were married. I saw we'd have a couple of children, we'd have a cat and a dog, and so on. And then I saw there'd be a lot of arguments. And anyway, I saw that, we'd be divorced and it would be unhappy, and there would be, and the other thing was I saw it would take me away from my spiritual path. And I also saw later that even though she could see the masters, she told them to leave her alone. I could not be with somebody like that. I, just felt I have to be with someone that's there to serve the masters. Also, she was jealous of Pearl because I spent a lot of time with Pearl, and she didn't like that. She wanted me to spend more time with her, So anyway, it's like a choice between leading the conventional romantic, having the kind of conventional, beautiful romantic marriage, or my spiritual path. Now, they're not necessarily exclusive, but for me, with this person, Elizabeth, it would have been exclusive. And so I had to tell her she had to leave. And it's always been hard for me to learn to say no, to draw boundaries and stuff, but I saw I had to do that. And what healed me was I really felt that I was dying, but what healed me was to realize her heart and my heart are one, that she's not far away. Actually, the part that's the twin ray, that part is never separated from my ray, So all was inside there, that she exists there, and I can send love to her higher self, and it's also a part of me. That's what healed me, to realize that we were not actually separate,
Yeah.
So,
And I think a lot of people agonize over that because maybe sometimes they give their power away too much to spiritual teachings or
yeah.
extremes on one end or the other. Like
Well, I
I have
see,
to be
yeah,
alone or I have to be totally with someone, but they're
yeah.
not leaving room for reason, and
I see a lot of people suffering because they haven't found their twin ray, They think that's going to be the answer. They don't realize that can make life miserable because there's more power. There's a tremendous amount of power comes up, and any problem you have is amplified,
yeah.
you know.
But a lot of people would say, well, that's the whole reason for my life. They're the love of my life, right? So it
Yeah,
would be a
you're not,
worthy
what
suffering.
if your twin is a different gender or different age, might be your grandmother, or
Yeah.
they might not even be an embodiment. They might be on another planet right now,
Yeah.
or in a spaceship or something, and it might not be just the right time. If I think the important thing is to realize there's a plan for your life, that who your parents are, where you were born, all that is determined. Where you're going to live, the major experiences in your life, who you're going to be partner with is determined. I've told some people, you could be celibate in a cabin on the mountain in a cave, something like that, and when it's time, the right person will show up at the door.
Yeah.
You
But I
can't
think
you can't avoid it. Yeah.
you are almost on the extreme end of the spectrum where you've had such a life of you got out there, you risked it, you traveled the world, you went for it. Um, and I think some people now in today's age, maybe this is more an issue of my generation, they feel so lonely, they feel so isolated, they feel so without purpose. They feel bombarded by the fear on the news and just world events. Um, so they might oppose you, or they might say, well, how am I going to find the person if I'm sitting in my house depressed alone? What do you say to these people of my generation in that
Well, it's my
sense?
generation too. I run into people my age every day when I go into town or I get emails. A lot of people are going through this, feeling very
Yeah.
cut off now. And what I have discovered myself is to try to send love where it is needed on the planet. And what you send out, it has to go through you first. If I want to send love to Ukraine, the people in Ukraine, it's going through me first. So that brings more love to me, actually, by sending it to others. The other thing is actually asking, what can I do right here in my community? Is there anything I can do to help other people? And that takes you out of your house, out doing something like working for a soup kitchen or giving someone on the street a sandwich or something. I mean, to ask, what is there I can do? And then find yourself working with other people to be a part of some activity that brings something good into the world somehow. Even on Facebook, I see people calling for help and other people saying, private message me, here's my, I'll give you my phone number, I'd love to talk with you. And people getting together, even like in Mount Shasta is a small community, but there are people, a lot of people cut off. In fact, I know a woman who cleans houses. She said there's some statistic like half of the people over 55 don't have one person they can call or talk to as a friend. That's shocking. So when she's cleaning house, they're following her around, talking with her, But that's
Yeah.
appalling. Why not? People could, as a service, tell these people, I'd love to visit you. Like one day a week, I'll visit you and I'll visit the person down the block or whatever for an hour and
Yeah.
talk.
It seems to be this isolation is just,
Yeah.
it's been too much the past 4 years. But then that brings me to the point of just, there's a hurricane approaching. It seems to be every other week there's some natural disaster, global event, terror of some kind. How do we hone in and combat this and feel a sense of purpose and not feel a sense of like just this hopeless, my hair's on fire, the world's gloom of doom?
Mhm.
How do we not get sucked into that as many
Well,
of us have been?
there's a process happening where the people that have finished enough of their karma are being raised into a higher frequency. Some people call it the fifth dimension. It's not really a dimension, it's a density, it's a frequency. And that's one thing people are going through. Hardly a day goes by, someone doesn't tell me they're feeling stretched, like part of them is raised into another world, but another part is being pulled down just by all the mundane cares, and what's on the news and things like that. And so when you sense that there's a process that's happening, part of what we're feeling is a raising process. The masters are raising our frequency. So you're kind of tuning out of one world, but you're not tuned into the new world yet either, kind of in between worlds. That's where the loneliness is. You're not in Shambhala yet, you're not in paradise, or you're not in the fifth dimension paradise yet, but you're not really totally in the human world either. So kind of trust that there's a whole group, like family, of people like you that are going through this. And pretty soon we're going to be together in a beautiful world where there won't be war or pollution.
Can I ask, and I know you've had experiences like in the inner earth in Shambhala, that time in Lake Louise when in your etheric body, when they took you down and showed you that, which is kind of a different dimension, different world, but in the sense of future world,
Mm.
um, what was I going to say? So, what do you basically look forward to in the afterlife? Like, what do you perceive Peter Mt Shasta will be doing in the afterlife?
Well, it's not really afterlife, it's after
Or,
this life, because life goes on,
so it's like
and
you're
we're maybe hundreds of
changing the
millions of
vehicle.
years old.
Yeah.
But, it's very interesting because there's a section in the Bible, I think it's in Genesis. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and found them fair and went unto them, and then they procreated and had children, but that wasn't really the initial plan. Some people describe that as we were space people. We came to Earth and saw primitive humanity here. We thought we could help them if we incarnated in flesh bodies.
Yep.
These ETs that I know look just like us. I mean, there are other kinds too, but the Pleiadian type, whatever, if one of them knocked on your door, you wouldn't know that they were any different from your neighbor, and they, so, when they came to Earth, they saw, well, they just wanted to speed up evolution and took on these flesh bodies. But then it was harder to get guidance, So they did bad things and created karma, and then had to keep reincarnating over and over. So now we're finishing up that karma, and we're waking up and realizing I'm not just this flesh body, I am actually a being vibrating at a higher rate. That, like, when you have dreams at night, you're going out in that etheric body and doing things.
Yeah. So can I ask, just for people who don't know or aren't acquainted with the masters, like ascended
Sure.
masters like Saint Germain, Jesus, Katumi, El Moria, these ones that you've worked with, what would you say to people that say, well, why are you using an external guide or entity? Because there could be the potential for being deceived. Why wouldn't you just go straight to the creator, go straight to source or the I am? What does Saint Germain, who you've had this very close bond with, close apprenticeship
Yeah.
with, why? I guess
Yeah.
just
Well,
playing
that's a
devil's
great
advocate. Like,
question. See, that's actually one reason that the masters don't appear more tangibly. I think they appeared to me because I'm a writer and they wanted me to write about this, but there are many sincere, highly evolved people don't see the masters. And it's because you don't become a master by sitting at their feet. And
mhm.
that's what a lot of people need to realize going to get psychic channeling. They want the master to tell them what to do, but the real masters don't do that very often, rarely. And people think that I'm sitting here talking with the masters all day. That's not true. It's very infrequent that I will hear an actual them say, do this or do that.
Yeah.
It's more intuition, right?
So in a sense, like they are the Godhead, just as Saint Germain said when he came to visit you.
They are God-realized
Yeah.
beings, but you don't become a master by them telling you what to do. You have
Yeah.
to find it inside. So what the masters want is you to find your own God source. That's how you become a master. Like when I first met Pearl, she said, Saint Germain is here and he's teaching you something. And I said, I don't hear anything. Would you please channel what he's saying? And she said, he won't let me do that. He's giving the message to your higher self. And when the time comes to act, you will know intuitively what to do, but you will just perceive it as spontaneous action.
Yeah.
In fact, she said, the highest way to get guidance is just spontaneously do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
You
Follow your
just
gut, kind of that
follow
feeling in your heart.
your
Yeah.
heart feeling there.
And that seems to be a theme that runs through the books. It's like you're on all these adventures in all these far off countries, and there'll be times where you just feel this overwhelming pull in your heart and you can't explain why. Like you were going to a wedding, you get
Yeah,
pulled away, and it turns out
right.
there's some guy on the street that needed you that was going
Yeah,
through a really hard time. And it seems to be this thing where you kept battling, but it's like as you got older, you seem to hone it and get better and better and better
right,
at knowing
right,
the
right,
pull of the heart
right.
versus the skeptical monkey mind. And that was so, I loved reading the books because they just read like it's a novel. It's like an adventure. It's always an adventure with you because you were always being pulled somewhere
Yeah,
because your light is needed wherever it's needed, and you're
yeah,
anchoring in these places, in these far off places. And I guess just on that topic, what would you say for spiritual seekers like me and those who are listening? What's the biggest pitfall? Like, what's the biggest mistake that we make, say when we're just so hardcore on the spiritual path, those spiritual
Yeah.
seekers, what's the pitfall, you think, the main one you see?
Well, thinking
Or,
that somebody else knows what you're supposed to do, you
yeah,
know, it is really important to learn to follow that guidance. And so that's where the meditation comes in, meditating on the light in the heart, because that's really where you get the guidance. All kinds of ideas of what you should do will go through your head, but in the end, it's the one that you really feel and hear. Like I'll wake up in the morning and call for the divine plan for the day, but I don't hear any words. Or like, what if my printer turned on and I got the itinerary for the day at 8:20 be here, at 9:17 be on this street corner because you're supposed to meet somebody, then go up the mountain and by this tree you're going to meet someone else. I would be so stressed out that I had to be at the right place at the right time. Instead, I just follow the flow. Like I'll go into town, like I think I'm going to the post office, but on the way I just get this feeling, turn left, and I said, why am I turning left? But it's almost like the car just wants to go that way. Then I see a parking spot, park there, and I thought, why? Then I get out and there's someone on the sidewalk. It says, oh, I came to Mount Shasta to meet you, but I didn't know how to contact you. I'm so glad I ran into you. Then I think, oh,
yeah,
what I was feeling, that was the right guidance.
yeah. And I
Like
like how,
yeah,
sorry, there were uh,
yeah.
mishaps and sort of even wrongs and sort of catastrophes that happened in the books. Like,
Mm.
I remember that time when you were staying at a friend's up in either Oregon or Canada, and you were staying in the upper room, and there was kind of a disembodied spirit that was like haunting the place, or someone that had recently died. And you
Mm.
called on Archangel Michael to sort of clear the space with his sword because the person just wouldn't leave you alone. And then you did it and did this cleansing and all this stuff. And then it ended up the next day when you were out of the house or left, the whole place burned down
Oh,
because
right.
you kept stressing about the Archangel Michael's power, like don't use it unless you really need it. And then it ended up that in their situation and their rent issue, they ended up getting back possession of the house because of some law, and it worked out for them, even though you had this horror initially on
Yeah,
learning.
it was
Yeah.
a woman owned this house, but she didn't live there, and she let like a bunch of hippies stay there. And they
Yeah.
started a commune there. They didn't actually live in the house. They lived in yurts and teepees and stuff, but
Okay.
they let me stay in the house. And I think the reason they didn't stay in the house was because it was haunted.
Yeah.
See, someone had died there, and it
Yeah.
was very creepy. I saw like someone coming toward me on the bed. I could see the sheets moving. And boy, that did it. I went to work, called on Archangel Michael. I stayed awake half the night doing these decrees. Then I left the next day. When I came back, the house had burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
But the way it worked out was there was a lot of weird energy there and strange legal things going on. So I think it worked out. So those people, the evil lawyers got sent away or whatever, and these people got to live on the land. So I just played one part in that, but it was to get rid of that entity that was there.
Yeah. And I think for people, as people perceive this term spiritual warfare,
Mm.
um, there were other instances that like sort of evil or bad forces came against you in the books. And what do you say to people in that situation? What should they
Well,
do?
this is what we're dealing with on the earth right now. I
Yeah.
mean, not just now, it's for a long time, but people need to see that there are these dark forces that are working behind and through various world leaders and business leaders also, that these entities who are non-human, or they were human, but they have desire to control things on the earth, that they're working through these people. So if we call on Archangel Michael, angels of blue lightning, Saint Germain, the violet consuming flame, to dissolve these energies and take these beings where they can learn to redeem themselves, that would be the best thing. You
Yeah.
know, some of these, like the world leaders, got to be where they are because of these entities, you know.
Yeah. And I remember when you were dealing with some entity in the books named Ashbar, who was
Mm-hmm.
kind of posing as this channeler who had
Yeah.
kind of a animated style, but was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a dark force. And I remember you looked straight into his heart and you said, you know, I'm activating the divine love within you. I see the love within you. Creator, please bring about the best, the highest and best for this person.
That
So sort
being,
of, yeah,
that being has turned around.
yeah,
Largely, I've seen some channelings from that being, and he has really turned around, and the person channeling him has had a big heart opening. So I know that I was brought into contact with this being who actually really threatened me and injured me, actually, even though it happened while I was asleep. I had physical pain for the week after that. And instead of getting angry at this being, I called on this being to receive divine love and for the masters to help this being with his evolution. And he turned around, started on the, a different path. And now this is like maybe 30 years later, that being is actually doing a pretty good job. And the person who's channeling that being seems to have awakened spiritually too.
that's great. And I just wanted to ask about the Space Brothers, as you call them sometimes, the Pleiadians. I think it was a being named Semjas, a female.
Samyaze,
Semjaze, yeah. So you had the encounter with her and Saint Germain at Lake Louise, Canada, when they sort of guided you in the middle of that blizzard out into the middle of nowhere. You ended up going to this luxurious hotel and you first met her there, I think. Um, and then the second time she appeared was when this entity, Ashbar, was attacking you and they came warning you.
Oh, right, right,
So
right.
I'm wondering what defines their energy? Like, how do you feel it as a contrast to most of these other beings that you've
These
interacted with?
people,
These ETs or
yeah,
space
well,
brothers, yeah.
like I say, we're ETs, do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just we've been here a long time and we kind
Yeah.
of call ourselves Earth people. You know,
Yeah.
they're just, vibrating at a little higher frequency. But there are ancestors basically, and they look like us, they can talk like us, except they don't need to eat so much, and they're very loving. And of course, their lifespan may be like 1,000 years,
Yeah. So for the layperson more, or like why would you say they don't appear more? Is it because you have to be at the level of
Well,
consciousness to receive them?
you ever watch Star Trek? It used to be on, maybe it's not your generation so much,
A
but
little bit. Yeah, not too
there's
much.
they in the spaceship Enterprise, they visit other galaxies, and there's something called the Prime Directive, and which means you're not allowed to interfere with these people you visit beyond a certain point. Like if they were going to blow themselves up, you could interfere and stop that, but you're not allowed to create a whole new civilization. So you are allowed to interfere to a certain degree. And so that's kind of, these beings have that prime directive that when we ask for their help, they can help us to a certain degree, but they're not allowed to just, land in the White House lawn and say, okay, this is the way it's going to be from now on.
Yeah, and living so close to Mount Shasta where you are, why is it, maybe could you explain a little bit for people like the power center, the energy there, but all and what exists there, but also why it's such a hot spot for ET activity?
Well, it's one of the highest mountains, I guess, in North America, and there are etheric temples there, and it seems to be one of the places that the ETs have used as a focal point. I used to work in a health food store in Mount Shasta. One day, a woman came in with her little boy who was 5 years old, and he said, "Mommy, last night I went inside the mountain and I saw where they fixed the UFOs. There's like a big garage there."
Mm.
And, I know this kid was not making that up. And later, I did see that place myself. It was like a giant parking lot. There was a bunch of craft in there. And for, I don't know, last 100, 200, 150 years, local people saw silver objects disappear into the mountain. So there are a lot of legends about that.
So
And
what is the purpose of Mount Shasta, would you say? The civilization that exists in there, what are they here for?
well, I'm not a fan of saying that there's a civilization
Okay.
under the mountain. That was created in 1978 by a psychic channel. When I came here in 72, the first time, there was no talk of that at all. They did talk about Lemurians that lived on the far side of the mountain.
Okay.
But it was not like a big civilization or anything like that. But I have seen temples on the side of the mountain that look like, if you were in Athens and looked up, you'd see the Acropolis, this big white marble temple on the hill there.
You mean
And I
like,
saw,
just so people know, like, you mean like in your inner vision, in your kind of
no, I
etheric
saw this.
vision?
One day I was in the shopping center and I looked up and I saw all on the side of the mountain these temples that appeared to be physical. And I wanted to stop people and say, "Look at that," but I realized nobody else was seeing it.
Oh, I
The
see.
second day I went back, they were still there, but they were sort of just barely visible. Then the third day, I couldn't see them at all. But these temples were located in places where people go to meditate. So people are drawn to these places. And I know people that live far away, and they say that in their dreams, they were brought to Mount Shasta, to a temple, and they were taught something by a master.
Okay.
So,
And they were
so
called to the mountain.
they use the mountain as a focal point for their work. Of course, they can exist. Other people don't need to come here for that. If somebody's supposed to get guidance, it doesn't matter if they're in Sedona or New York or Seoul, South Korea. The masters can go. They exist in multiple bodies simultaneously. They're working all around the earth without sleep. But Mount Shasta is one of their main focal points. They have other ones too around the world, frequently large mountains, because they're above human thought. Human thought only goes up to about 8,500 feet.
So basically with the I am and the I am presence, which is a lot of the focus of Saint Germain's work and your work, how do you define that to people and how do you best use it to your advantage?
Hmm. Well, the sort of primitive religion is to worship something outside yourself, whether it's nature's spirits or God or a person, like worshiping Jesus or Mother Mary or whatever. And then, people call themselves sinners. I mean, Jesus never said you're a sinner. That's the church that says that. You have to go to the church to reach God and so on. The teachings of the Far East, of India, God is everywhere. And in you too, that you are like a baby God in a sense. You have the seed of God within you, and you can become God realized, that you realize that. But they also sometimes, that's a lot of work to sit and meditate. So it's much easier to pray to some deity, and they have thousands of deities, you know. So that's a part of the path. It really opens the heart if you sing to the God presence that you love, like singing to Jesus and Mary. It's very heart opening if you really feel love. So to sing to Krishna or Rama or Ganesha, whoever it is, if you feel love for them, that can open your heart, but that doesn't really lead so much to God realization. You really need to meditate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and with all the suffering now, I mean, I know I've mentioned it, but like when people say, I can't take this, this is brutal, I have physical disabilities, loneliness, I've dealt with betrayal, I've dealt with, I'm just sick of living, I'm sick of being on earth in general. So I think a lot of people have that sentiment now
Oh, yeah.
because there's just so much collective noise and chaos, and it's like you can't even be heard when you speak. Um, how do you what shred of hope is there? What can you offer to people? Why? Why are we here? Why do we have to do this?
Well, it kind of comes back to, we were one with God at one point. Imagine the sun with these millions or trillions of rays of light going out. And at the end of each ray of light is a human soul. But before those rays went out, God was self-contained. Imagine before there was light. It says in the Bible, God created light, let there be light. So it was just all pure consciousness. So imagine in India, there's something called a kalpa. It's like something like 450 million years. That's one day of God, one night of God, another 450 million years. So during one of these nights of God is in bliss during that time. So God wakes up and the male, female, the mother, father aspect wakes up and they talk to themselves and say, what do you want to do today? Well, I'm tired of all this bliss. Let's have an adventure.
Hmm.
Let's have children and send them out into the universe and see what they get into. And it'll be a lot of fun. Well, and we'll give them some warnings and stuff, like don't play with fire or don't play with matches or whatever. But if they do it, we'll let them do it and they'll get burnt. And then they'll realize that we told them that and that it's kind of like God having an adventure. And so we've created this situation for ourselves. We're not here now by accident. So we're sort of learning the lessons we chose to learn, but eventually we'll go back into being one with God and we'll go, wow, that was amazing. Like every day, not every day, but frequently, I'm having these realizations about life on earth, just sort of amazing lessons. That I see one of the first sins was impatience. That, we were sent here to help earth people, but we couldn't believe how dumb they were. And we got impatient with them.
Hmm.
And created a lot of there was anger, war. We went off by ourselves, and so now we're having to process that again.
Impatience, yeah.
Impatience, yeah. Or somebody cuts you off in traffic or something, or steals your parking spot. You don't know why they did that. Maybe that person has a child that's sick in the hospital. They had to go in the store quickly and get out, and so they took the choice, they cut you off from your parking spot, but they may have had a good reason. But it's like not blaming them, not blaming everybody, and trying to feel love. Like Jesus said, love your enemies. It's easy to love your friends, but loving your enemies is more difficult.
Do you think that you've had, let's say, past lives, for example, where you were in committed partnerships, like physical intimacy,
Sure,
sexual union, like long,
sure,
long term?
sure.
And do you think for the level of spiritual realization or ascension that you wanted in this lifetime, would it have been possible to have even let's say a woman who was on her game, spiritually fit, doing the work just as hard as you, would it have been possible just in terms of releasing the sexual energy in the
Sure.
act? Or does it work against the God realization?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about that. If someone takes certain vow, like goes to a cave in the Himalayas or could be on Mount Shasta, and you're going to follow a certain path, then the celibacy is important. But there are all kind of other practices they're doing. They're doing fasting, breathing exercises, intense yoga. That's a certain path. But for most people that are living in the world, that's not practical to do. And there are other things that people don't learn doing that. Okay, maybe they can learn to be a breatharian or to be, to live 200 years, or they learn all kinds of things that way, but they're not, that person is not learning how to be in the world and be a normal person, So part of what we're here, we want to learn, part of us wants to learn relationship. So then, it's actually the whole dynamics of relationship. This is what should be taught like in school, how to communicate, just the science of communication, things like nonviolent communication. I mean, I talk to people that are married, and there's some basic things. They've been married 30 years, and there's some basic things they haven't communicated about. Like the woman is not sexually satisfied. And she never told him, he never asked. And so they get divorced and split up. There are big differences between how men and women experience sexuality, and this is something really should be taught. And because for the man, it can be a big loss of energy if he overdoes it,
Mm-hmm.
and for the woman too, but it's more for the man. And to learn how to direct this energy within the body. So, it's not like the Hollywood love affair or having a one-night stand or something. If a couple is really deeply communicating, it's beyond a sexual experience. It's a love experience, it's a mental experience, it's a spiritual experience. And that energy can be raised to actually make people more spiritual. It can advance them on the path if they do it consciously, but
Yeah.
there are very few places where that's taught,
Yeah. And it, have people asked you, do you create karma by being in a 30, 40-year relationship, having 3 kids? Are you creating further karma and bonds and ties to the earth plane?
You may be dissolving karma by doing that. I have to say something, the
Okay.
yogis, and especially the Buddhists, lamas, mostly being men also, they talk about, the big sin is attachment, you know,
Mhm.
and not being in relationships where you're clinging to each other and that type of thing. But so the whole thing is to renounce the world, renounce your desires, renounce all these things. I have to say, when my daughter was born, I was 45 at the time. She was born on the bedroom floor in my hands. And she looked at me and she said, "Forget your life. You belong to me. From now on, you will do what I say."
Mhm.
And I realized she was my guru. She became my guru. That whole experience, talk about surrender. I mean, if she wants you to get up at 2 a.m. and drive around for a couple of hours, then you do that. If she wants this or that, that most of these yogis have no idea what surrender is on that scale, you
So
know?
that was a very transformative experience for you.
Yeah, it was. a spiritual, that was a lesson in mastery, learning to be a parent. That's not, yogis should not look down on people that are householders thinking that they're not being spiritual. These people, in fact, there's some of these yogis that I met in the Himalayas. They were very evolved in one way, but they couldn't be around women, you know, or they couldn't go into town. It was too materialistic for them. So I met actually one of these yogis that I knew ages ago, reincarnated as a woman, and came to me in this lifetime. She in an Indian family, and the parents were pushing her to get married and have children. And she's saying, I don't want to, I want to be a yogi. And I said, no, you were a yogi in a very recent lifetime. This lifetime, you chose to be a householder, get married, have children, and learn to accept that, you know?
So it's a lot about just surrendering to what, there's not as many of these laws as we perceive maybe when we first start out, and rules.
I ask God, if I am meant to be in relationship, bring the right person in perfect divine order. Otherwise, keep frivolous people away from me. If someone would take me away from what my path is, please protect me from them, you know? And I was in a relationship for a while with a woman who, see, the way my life is, I could only live with someone who's completely has the same focus of mine, who's dedicated to this service, you know? And a woman like that did show up, and we lived together for about 1.5 years. And then all of a sudden she was supposed to go somewhere else. So I respected that. It was painful.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we were just working together as a team like that. But I respect that she got pulled to go somewhere else, and she had other things to learn. But I saw that that's possible. You can have a spiritual partner, you know, a life partner. You can have a life partner, and it can advance you on the spiritual path. You know, in fact, some of these great yogis, Tibetan yogis, lived in cave for 12 years, could melt the snow around them. They didn't need warm jackets in the winter. They could keep themselves warm. And after this one yogi, I think after 20 years, came back and he was shown he was to be married and have children, you know?
Yeah, and I think because I think a lot of women and men are frustrated to the point of wanting to give up. They're searching, but they're thinking, well, this generation is so warped, or so childish, or so lacking in values and maturity, and hasn't grown up. So women, I mean, I think more women are like, yeah, this is kind of a pretty pathetic stock of men. Like, how am I going to find anyone? So just as a counterpoint to what you say, I know everyone should have faith in that way, but
well, there are many people, men as well as women, look at a relationship as kind of entertainment, you know, more when people are younger. As people get older, they want to more settle down with someone they can rely on, you know.
yeah.
But among younger people, I find it's more, oh, this will be fun for a while. Then when I get tired of this, I'll try somebody else, you know. That can be very painful.
Yeah. I wanted to show your book here. So this is the first one.
Right, of my autobiography.
The first part of the autobiography, Search for the Guru, Adventures of a Western Mystic.
Yeah.
That's you in your 20s, I think.
That's my passport picture in 1972.
Okay. And then this is part 2 on Mount Shasta.
Right.
So I like that one, that photo.
Apprentice to the Masters, right.
Looks like Bunny Flat, right?
Yeah,
Bunny Flat where you're at, yeah.
Right.
So
now, this sword is the symbol of wisdom. you know.
Yeah. And then just the one with Pearl
Yeah, my
about
teacher.
her life and your life
Yeah.
and this
I have
last.
actually, I think 13 books out now.
Yeah. And this one I just started reading.
Yeah.
So Your Adventures in Tibet. Um,
Yeah,
so
these are all personal experiences. So,
yeah, I think I greatly appreciate how there's so much suffering that you talk about in the books, and personal loss, personal issues, but you seem to always take it with a sort of lighthearted, self-deprecating humor, which I deeply appreciate. And I just identified so deeply with the feelings and even the specific situations where I it was like helped me to know that someone else,
mhm.
and that you know, being older, you are here as this example and this guide and this light for other people. And I just really appreciate that. So I just wanted to let you know
Yeah.
and
Well,
thank you
I
so
would,
much.
suggest everybody study the Buddhist Eightfold Path because it deals with the real basics of the spiritual path. That what causes suffering is attachment.
Mhm.
So, if I'm attached to finding a certain woman and she's not in my life, then I'm suffering. And if I can just let go of that, I am free of that attachment. I know that the right person will be there at the right time. And for right now, I'm supposed to be here now, alone, but I'm not really alone. I'm actually connected. In fact, that person who's coming to me in the future, their heart and my heart are already one.
Yeah. Well,
So,
you have a lot of faith and you've built this faith muscle over
yeah,
many years.
yeah. But still, the attachment, I want this. In order to be happy, I need this, I need that. I need a new computer or a new car. Or what, you know, I wish I looked different. I wish I didn't have white hair. Oh, you know, it's
Yeah.
endless when you start thinking, I need these things to be happy. I know women that are, you know, really nice, good looking women, and they spend an hour a day in front of the mirror putting cosmetics on,
Yeah.
and if something's a little off or their hair isn't quite right, they think, no man's gonna look at me today because, it's just sad.
Yeah. But do you have high hopes for humanity, Peter, in these coming
Well,
years,
I
this
know
world, this all of it?
it's all gonna go and it's all unfolding according to a. Um, so the people that need certain lessons will get those lessons, and those people don't need those lessons will get their rewards. So, but it's up to each person. Each person has been shown if you go this way, you get this, you go that way, you go that. But some people don't believe it. They still go down the dark road towards selfishness and control, and they think they're going to still get what they want. Well, they have to be allowed to do that. Sometimes, if you babysit for kids or you let them play in the backyard. I mean, my mother used to do this. I'd have a few friends over and we get into a fight. And sometimes she'd let us just fight it out.
Hmm. Yeah.
If she said, no, you stop that, you go over here, you go, then we don't learn the lesson. But
But
after a while, it's
that's
just,
what that's
yeah,
what's occurring in humanity right now, more or less.
exactly. Yeah,
The war, the
yeah.
bringing up of all of it. Yeah. It's a dense time. It can feel hard to even see through the air because it's just like this fog or this
Well,
smoke
it's
of
a movie. Imagine
like,
God
yeah.
to watch a movie. And it's not going to be an exciting movie unless there's evil in it. There has to be good and bad, right and
Yeah.
wrong to
Yeah, of
make it
course, of
exciting.
course.
You don't want to go to the
Yeah.
theater, spend $10 on a movie when everyone just sits around and says, I love you.
But how do you think we'll reflect on this when we get out of here and go to the higher plane? How do you
Well,
think we'll
I'm
look
sure
back
we'll
on
go,
this
wow,
plane?
that was intense.
Compared to all the other ones, maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but
tougher
also
than,
you'll realize that that seems like a long, long time we're on the earth. It's just going to be a few seconds in eternity, you know?
yeah,
You know, like you went to a movie and it took an hour or hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, and then you walk out and, you know, 30 years later, you go, wow, that was an intense movie, but, you know,
yeah.
so
Okay, well,
thing is
thank
to
you.
have
Yeah,
faith that there is a plan. We're not here alone. These masters, these great masters, Jesus, Saint Germain, is it? They're they're watching out, seeing, you know, in fact, they're even these ETs have proven they can unplug the missile silos, these nuclear missiles. That's been demonstrated to the military. When they were having a nuclear missile test, they saw a spaceship fly over and that missile would not work, you know. So they will not let the earth blow up. These great beings, the ETs, the ascended masters, they're working together that will make sure that the highest divine plan unfolds according to the best way. And these beings are aware of you.
yeah. And we just have to have faith and anchor that knowing into our hearts.
You could not take a breath without God. You know, again, like that I am presence behind me, that ball of light is sending light down into you and it's telling your heart to beat.
Yeah,
You know, so God is not far away. You don't need to struggle real hard to find God. God knows you're thinking of him, her, and the answer will come in the right way. It might come through going to a bookstore and, wow, that book is like, I feel a lot of energy from that book. I should read that, or I should watch this YouTube video, or the guidance comes in all kinds of ways.
do you think, Peter, we could close with a few decrees, if
Sure,
if you would like?
sure. Even a
um
little short meditation first,
yeah, sure, sure.
where just feel this is the meditation Saint Germain gives in Unveiled Mysteries. Just feel like the sun is right here in the center of your chest, a sun, and it's warm. And you know your physical body is not really physical. If you study quantum physics, it's just energy, thought, vibration. So when you think of the sun being there, the sun is there and it's radiating through what you call the physical body, but it's just the radiation of the sun radiating through the energy of your body. So there are no limits to it. It's going out into the room, out into space, filling the whole earth. And then when you say, I am, you call that light into action.
I
I
am.
is the father aspect, am is the mother. The two working together in your heart is Father, Mother, God. So just feel that for a moment. I am. I am the presence of God right
I
here
am.
and now. I am the living light
I am.
going to going to humanity. Just say it silently to yourself. I am the love of God. Come forth now in the heart, in the hearts of every being on earth. I am peace on earth. I am being guided at every moment. I am free of suffering. I am wholly pure and perfect. I am dissolving and consuming all negative karma, and I am receiving my divine guidance from my higher self and from the ascended masters at every second of my existence. And I am following that guidance perfectly. by the power of God that I am, and it is done.
It is done.
It's powerful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'll put the links for the books in the description so people can check you
Okay.
out. And you also have a YouTube channel, which I can share. You have a lot of lectures
Yeah.
and interviews on there.
My website is iamteachings.com. I think it's at the bottom of every email, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put that in the link too.
Teachings. And when I put the video on YouTube, I'll put a link to your channel also.
Okay, sounds good. And yeah, I would encourage everyone to check out Peter's work, and they've helped me a lot in my life. So thanks again, Peter. And I would encourage people to visit Mount Shasta too, where you live, for healing and love.
But it's wherever they are. It can.
Oh yeah.
The masters are everywhere, so they can get it. If you
Yeah.
feel pulled to come here, then honor that. Come.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Peter.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day. Okay.